Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this exciting session on counteracting digital payment fraud through RegTech and SupTech. Prevent, protect, and pursue. My name is Cyril Okoroigwe, and it is an honor to serve as the moderator for this critical conversation. This session is part of the Alliance for Innovative Regulations Tech Sprint, focused on combating payment fraud in West Africa, a pressing issue as digital transactions continue to grow rapidly across the region. Payment fraud is growing, is a growing global challenge, and it's particularly important in regions like West Africa, where digital payments are expanding quickly and reaching new communities. With cross-border payments, which is essential in the region's economy, West Africa is faced with hurdles due to inconsistent standards and fragmented oversight, leaving financial institutions and consumers exposed. Despite regulations, enforcement is often inconsistent and without centralized data sharing or robust cross-border collaboration. Fraudsters exploit systems and the weaknesses. Today, I'll be examining how RegTech and SupTech, two powerful areas of regulatory and supervisory technologies, can play pivotal roles in stopping fraud before it starts, protecting users, and even pursuing the fraudsters. Before we proceed, just a few housekeeping notes. Kindly note that the meeting is being recorded and will be made available and accessible on AIR's website. We would also request that all devices are placed on mute. Comments and questions will be addressed during designated Q&A slots. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them via the chat function. And let's have fun. So joining me are three highly accomplished panelists who bring diverse perspective and expertise to this conversation. In no particular order, join me in welcoming Henry Chukwu. Henry is the Senior Manager at the Embedded Lab, Innovations for Poverty Action, where he works on innovative financial solutions for the underserved communities. I would also like to welcome Georgina Famojuro. She's the head of fraud at 3S Money, with deep expertise in developing fraud prevention strategies in the financial sector. And last but not the least, Florian Loecker, who is the Chief Product Technology Officer at FNA, an expert in network analytics, who focuses on leveraging technology to tackle complex financial crimes. So, we'll start with some initial thoughts from each panelist on how their current role relates to digital payment fraud and their thoughts on the current landscape. Then we will move into a series of questions for our discussions. So I would like to start with you, Henry. Basically, 1 minute, just to set the tone. What are your thoughts, right? First of all, how does your current role relates to digital payment fraud, and what are your thoughts on the current landscape? So after you, Gina, and then Florian. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Cyril, for the opportunity. My name is Henry Chukwu. As you already mentioned, I work with Innovations for Poverty Action, where I lead IPA's Consumer Protection Embedded Lab, where we are currently supporting regulators, Central Bank of Nigeria to be precise, to build their capacity for evidence-based conduct supervision, looking at deep into the kind of data, the administrative data they're collecting from FIs, to build their capacity on how they could use innovative approaches to monitor the market. So from where I sit and the kind of work we do at the moment with the Central Bank of Nigeria and also Consumer Protection Research Initiative, there are a couple of things happening in the market already. As you know, especially in West Africa, the proliferation of innovation, there's a whole lot of innovation happening. And as as you innovate and have this innovation come into the market, so do we also have new consumer risks. So we support test solutions, design and test solutions that support in mitigating against these risks. So I think this conversation is very important, and it's very important for the industry and innovators to start thinking about possible solutions that could help to mitigate these risks. I'll pause here and hand over to the next person. Thank you.
Gina, over to you.
Hello, my name is Georgina Famojuro, and I head the fraud team at 3S Money in the UK. We are an EMI, we're a global company that deals with electronic payments, okay? From our side of the fence, digital fraud is a reality, especially in the space that we are operating. We are finding that fraudsters are becoming even more specialized in their kind of attacks that they are exhibiting with the payments that we are seeing. We're noticing that there's a lot of payments that are being made to impact clients, not only their financial well-being, but also their psychological well-being. So our job really is to find ways to mitigate against those frauds and also to protect ourselves and our clients.
And Florian.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Florian Loecker. I'm the Chief Product and Technology Officer at FNA. We are a technology provider, and one of the things that makes me really enjoy my job is that I can help play a role in terms of combating this increasing threat, right? So as Gina has pointed out, I mean, this is impacting many, many people, and there's indeed livelihoods at stake. So I think this should really be a focus and priority across the globe, and this is in fact what we're seeing, right? So this is a priority now for policymakers. And now, also to Gina's point, the behavior of these fraudsters is getting more sophisticated by the day, right? Specifically, they're using different payment service providers, they're using different financial institutions, they're using cross-border arrangements, faster payment systems, etc., in order to move the funds. And really the way in which we come in is we provide tools in order to build networks out of these various different transactions, and then provide tools really to combat against that. And I hope I can give you a bit more flavor as to how that works. But I think crucially, and I think this is also why this conversation is so important, what we need to do is really bring together all kinds of stakeholders, not just the tech providers. I actually think that the technology is often the easiest part of the equation, right? There's also legal constraints, there's also political constraints, ethical constraints, business constraints, you name it, right? And so it's important for us as a tech provider to be able to work with these constraints and take them into account and take them essentially as a given. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Great. And from the insights provided so far, I mean, it's very clear that we are in for a very good ride. Technology, I agree 100%, is just one side of the problem. There are other sides, especially the people problem side that you've highlighted, Florian, and these are some of the issues that really has to be considered in coming up with a solution. So I come back to you, Henry. Your work focuses on financial innovation for the underserved populations. What do you see as the biggest threats of digital payment fraud for these communities? And how can RegTech and SupTech tools help mitigate these risks?
Yeah, thank you, Cyril, for that question. I think first it's very important for us to even understand this demography, right? The low income and underserved communities, often especially in developing markets, they often lack experience around digital and formal financial services. They have limited or no financial or digital literacy. These factors make them vulnerable to electronic digital payment fraud. The biggest threat I see is around phishing attacks, identity theft, social engineering scams, where these fraudsters exploit the trust and lack of or limited awareness of fraud tactics amongst this population to exploit them, right? Also, we also see cases where this fraud eventually occurs. These communities may also face limited recourse and support, making losses devastating. Definitely, I believe, based on also part of our work, that RegTech and SupTech solutions could actually help to mitigate these risks. You also mentioned that when you were speaking, Cyril. Believe that financial service providers could develop innovative AI-based solution that could monitor transactions on real-time basis, identify these threats, suspicious transactions, flag them, and prevent them from happening. From the regulator's standpoint, it's also very important to deploy a robust supervisory solution to have a better understanding of the market through advanced data analytics, understand the trends, come up with policies, and also ensure that financial service providers are doing the right thing, deploying the right solutions to mitigate against these risks. Thank you. I will pause here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Henry. And I mean, that's spot on. There's really no gainsaying that the role of SupTech and RegTech, as it were, is critical, in driving this change. And that leads me smoothly to the next questions for you, Gina. As the head of fraud for 3S Money, you are deeply involved in fighting financial crime. Could you share some emerging fraud tactics you are seeing in digital payments and how your team approaches these challenges?
Yes, thank you for the question. So as you said, I do head the fraud team at 3S Money. There are various types of frauds that we're experiencing, not necessarily unique to 3S Money, just generally in the fraud space industry. We have app fraud, which is authorized pushed payment. This is a big area at the moment in the UK because there's been new regulation just to target app fraud, which deals with faster payment type fraud. We have phishing scams, which Henry has mentioned now, account takeover, identity theft, compromise of OTP, which is a one-time password. These are directly to the phones. And we have beg fraud, which is a business email compromise. These are all different types of frauds that we are experiencing as an industry in the UK, not just exclusively to 3S Money. We're finding that education is the main thing. This is one of the ways that we use to target these type of fraud. We have malicious payees and malicious redirection. This is when customers are manipulated into making payments themselves because they believe they are making payments to the legitimate person, but they're finding that that is not the case. These things are happening via emails, phishing emails, smishing, and vishing. These are all types of notifications that clients are receiving on their mobile devices that is kind of making them make these payments. So the first thing is that customers are actually making the payments themselves, but being manipulated into making it. And that makes it extremely difficult to actually fight, especially because the customer believes they're making the right payment in the first place. Account takeover is also becoming really, really, really common in digital payments because, again, fraudsters are gaining access to customers' payment platforms and making payments that way. It is hard for a customer who's been a victim of fraud to claim fraud when the payment was initiated from their platform. Okay, so these are the things that we're finding that is becoming a bit of a problem. We at 3S Money engage in various tactics, various ways of preventing fraud. The main thing is to educate our customers of the type of frauds they would be expecting, depending on the type of payments they're making. Advising our dedicated fraud team to be aware of the kind of frauds that are emerging. We also use technology, as Florian has said. Technology is a big part of what we do at 3S Money. We verify every single bit during the onboarding stage. When the accounts are being opened, we make sure that we are dealing with the right people. We also use data technology and transaction monitoring to monitor the type of payment that our clients are doing, because we know our clients. So we have a robust KYC tool that makes us actually analyze our clients when they start with us, so we know what type of payments they would be making. And if anything looks different to what we already see from them, we are getting in touch with them. We are locking those payments down, and we're getting in touch with them for confirmation. So all payments go through transaction monitoring, and having effective transaction monitoring using data, payment data of the client, is helping us combat this type of fraud. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina, for that detailed insight. And I think the work you're doing basically has a lot of impact and potential in ensuring that the rate at which fraud is approached is more from a proactive point of view than a reactionary point of view. Then I'll come to you, Florian. As a Chief Product and Technology Officer at FNA, right? Your work essentially is very critical in ensuring that fraud is proactively dealt with. So from your point of view, what do you really, how do you go about, the analytics process of detecting, analyzing fraud patterns, and I mean, in a way that they will be properly tracked and reported proactively?
Yeah, thanks, Cyril. I think at the outset, I mean, and I think the clue is already in the name of our company, right? So what we focus on is network analytics as the main toolkit, right? Now, why is that? So Gina and Henry have both alluded to the fact that I think that authorized payments fraud is becoming more and more of an issue, right? This is a very big difference from unauthorized payments fraud, because that is obviously where somebody hacks into an account or stuff like that, right? However, there are very good technological safeguards against that in place today, right? So I think we are very good at catching this type of fraud already. Right now, the situation is entirely different when it's about authorized payments, because as Gina has highlighted, this is when actually the victim themselves authorizes the payment. And how do you prevent that, right? Are you even supposed to prevent that, right? After all, I mean, these are people, commanding their own accounts, and they want to make their own payments, right? So how do you deal with that? Well, so our angle on that is network analytics. And so with network analytics, there's a network, and then networks have nodes, and then the nodes are linked, and the nodes in these networks, they represent accounts, but they could also represent companies or maybe individuals. And then the links, they are the payments between these individuals. And why are we doing that? Well, we are doing this because actually this data is quite useful in fighting financial fraud, because in the process of the fraud, right, in the operations of doing fraud, you have money laundering, right? So these are the mule accounts. Again, Gina, and this is something that has alluded to it, and this is something that we see deployed across many banks, right? There's a KYC process in place, partially in order to avoid these money mules opening accounts at the bank that can be used in the money laundering process, right? And just to explain that money laundering process, so what it does is it basically starts with the fraud, and then it goes over several steps with the accounts in the middle in order to disguise the origin of the funds. And because they want to disguise it, so there are two things that are critical, right? So one is that you want to hop across different entities. So you want to move them funds from one financial institution to the next, or maybe from one payment service provider to the next, or maybe from one country to the next, right? In order to specifically disguise the origin of the fund. And you want to do it quickly, right? So one of the things that's often cited as a root cause of the current crisis is the advent of faster payment system, which of course in itself is a big benefit, right? It really streamlines the business of doing payment, but it can also be exploited by fraudsters. And so then at the end of this chain, invariably there's some kind of a cash out, right? So the fraudsters want to get to the money, so they would, you might know, maybe withdraw it from an ATM, maybe they would convert it into cryptocurrency, etc. There's many different ways by which this can be done. Now, we see this network analytics as a tool, right? And the crucial piece is to have availability of that data, right? Because in this way, we can build networks that complement what already exists at the financial institution level today. This can be complicated data to get, because obviously there's privacy considerations here, and even just within a national framework, that is hard data to get, right? Let alone cross-border, which is often even harder. But that's really where the current initiatives are. We're seeing a lot of thrust going in that direction. We're seeing certainly many national level initiatives come to life where data is shared across organizations. This is also where we're working together with supervisors, because supervisors, whilst they're not necessarily the owner of the original data, they can help and play a big role in terms of just facilitating the setup of a data sharing facility like that, right? And so this is where they come in. So yes, so this is how we provide one part of the toolkit. There are many others, KYC, GINA, as well as other transaction monitoring techniques. They certainly also have a role to play, but this is specifically what we focus on.
Yeah, but still on that, would you say, how would you describe the support you're getting from these different stakeholders that you work with to make sure that this, especially for cross-border payments?
Yes, so for cross-border payments, I think it's a very nascent area, right? So initiatives exist, and we're actively working with initiatives, for example, where certain financial institutions that just have a lot of cross-border business, they're onboarded into a national system. So this is something that we're seeing, which is starting to go in the right direction, right? But you know, for truly there to be real cross-border sharing, these initiatives, they're often held back by legal complications, right? So think about, for example, legal liability. Okay, so what happens if I share, so I'm country one, right, and I share my data with country two? What happens if country two now has a data breach, right? So that's a problem. Privacy is a problem. Ethical concerns are a problem. Obviously, this is quite valuable data, right? So I mean, there's often, you know, the way in which we conduct our payments business says a lot about who we are, in a sense, right? What are we interested in, etc. So this is all quite sensitive data, right? Which is often the complication. However, what we're seeing is that at the national level, it's starting to work. The supervisors are playing a great role facilitating that. At the end of the day, it's really something that that enables financial institutions to become better at what they're already doing a good job at today, right? It's not something that the supervisors are truly taking over as such, right? So they're not the responsible parties. They're assisting with a toolkit that can help FIs just you know, do an even better job than what they're doing today.
Thank you for that insight. And it's interesting that this is actually picking up in this scale. Obviously, with more collaboration, I imagine that the results will be a lot more effective. Henry, I'll come to you now. A lot has been talked about in terms of the efforts or the amount of work that's gone into, you know, developing the right tools to be able to proactively, you know, give insights. Now, how can we balance innovation, right, with protection, especially in rapidly changing financial landscapes? Are there ways regulators can support a proactive approach to fraud prevention while fostering financial inclusion?
Great. Thanks for that question. For me, I think when we talk about balancing innovation and protection, is essential, right? But I guess we all can as well agree that it could also be very challenging. As I mentioned before now, as we have new innovation, new technologies, we also have new risks that comes with it. So it requires a lot of collaborations, and it has been said over and over during this call. There's need for collaboration among the industry stakeholders, the regulators, the financial service providers, and sector enablers. For the regulator, I think there are a couple of approaches they could adopt or ways they could support to balance these the innovation and at the same time effectively protect consumers. One, I think is important for the regulator to rethink their regulatory approach, right? So I think I would recommend more of adaptive regulatory approach where they give some sort of flexibility for innovation while setting clear standards for consumer protection at the same time. This they could also do through setting up regulatory sandboxes, right, where they could invite innovators to test their solutions within a controlled environment. Again, we have said a lot around RegTech and SupTech and the need for having the data, having solutions that could do real-time monitoring of the transactions, identify the threats before it even happened, suspicious transactions, and the need for the regulator to also implement advanced supervisory solutions that they could use to effectively monitor the market, understand what is happening, and come up coordinate the stakeholders to be able to implement solutions that could mitigate against this risk. And when Gina was speaking, she also mentioned something around education. I think consumer education and awareness is very important, but it's also quite expensive. So you need someone who is going to be there to coordinate the process, coordinate all the industry stakeholders to implement consumer education programs that could further enlighten consumers about these prevailing risks or the threats and ensure that they don't fall prey to those threats. Another point I think the regulator should do more is around data protection. And we have said about this data protection and how laws, when you move from one market to another, how that differs. There's also some sort of complexity that comes with that, especially when you're doing cross-border remittance or cross-border payment. There's need to for the regulators to set clear standards around data security and privacy. To ensure that consumers' data is protected and also provide some sort of governance around how the data is shared.
Thank you very much, Henry. You said quite a lot. Just reading through some of the things, some of the good points you highlighted. You talked about the need for an adaptive regulatory approach. You also mentioned the need for more consumer education and awareness. The regulatory sandbox, you touched on it. The need for effective real-time monitoring, the need for clear standards, and obviously data protection. And these are really at the core of our conversation today. Now, talking about data protection, at the heart of this is trust. Gina, protecting users and building trust is a central goal for RegTech and SupTech. How does 3S Money work to ensure that users feel protected against fraud? And are there any specific tools or strategies you find particularly effective in real-time fraud detection?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Okay, so at 3S Money, as I alluded to earlier on, and I think Henry has mentioned it, and so has Florian, for us, education is key. Empowering our clients and even our team on knowing what fraud looks like, what the emerging frauds are, and kind of providing adequate information with regards to how to protect ourselves from this fraud as it affects both our clients and ourselves. We have a dedicated fraud team, which I head, and there is direct access to us. We have a dedicated telephone number, email address. Clients can reach out to us directly and speak to a human being when there has been a fraud incident. It is absolutely essential because I believe that a lot of people are victims of fraud who don't report it for various reasons. And it's not only for financial losses that they don't report this. A lot of them are embarrassed to actually report the fact that they have been victims of fraud because looking back at this attack, it's pretty obvious that it's not kosher, but they fell for it anyway, and there's a lot of shame attached to that. So we have a team that deals with that directly. We also, as I've mentioned earlier, we have real-time monitoring. Our clients know that their payments are being monitored. They know that they will get a phone call or an email address, an email from their relationship managers to question a payment that looks suspicious. And obviously, it is suspicious for a reason. We use rules. We write rules for our payments. So all these rules are written to highlight and pick out irregularities in payments that we're seeing. And it is kind of bespoke and tailored to the customer's previous patterns, okay? It's not just random. These payment types are actually looked at in detail to see our client, what type of payments they're making, and the rules that are followed to monitor their payments they're making. There is something called COP, which is a confirmation of payee. This is linked to faster payments. As you know, faster payments is fast. We are finding that fraudsters most likely prefer that because the money comes in and there is a limited amount of time that the money has to go to the recipient or the beneficiary. So we're finding that fraudsters prefer that. Henry has mentioned about regulatory legislation. The UK is heavily regulated when it comes to payments industry, really. So there is a new directive that banks have to refund victims of fraud up to 75 grand within 5 days. But this is only applicable to faster payments for now. There is a new regulation coming in for SEPA payments for EU in September 2025, where verification of payee is a big thing. 3S is signing up to the confirmation of payee. So our clients know that when they make payments, they match the name, the sort code, account number, and they feel reassured when they're making such payments. And this is applicable to all faster payments in the UK at the moment, with the SEPA one coming in September. Continuous monitoring of our rules. So we have different types of rules for different types of payments, and we continually review these rules to see if they're still fit for purpose. So our clients feel reassured that if they do fall victim of fraud, they have a team they can speak to, a team of experts who know what type of questions to ask them when they have been victims of fraud, because that's really essential, we find. It's not just we're holding you liable or how did this happen? We don't want to know. We want to get to the bottom of it, because every case we get is a chance for us to learn something new. And fraudsters are smart people. They do drive innovation. A lot of people agree and a lot of people don't agree, but fraudsters do drive innovation. And they seem to always be a step or two ahead of the banks. So it's about proactively actually looking at, I'm so sorry, I'm getting all sorts of notifications, bear with me. It's about looking at not a reactive, but a proactive way of targeting fraud and making our clients know that they are safe in our hands. We have online marketing information that we give to our clients. Our clients have dedicated relationship managers who actually deal with every case of fraud. So they know when they make a payment, and if there is a problem, there is somebody to sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina. You talked about those that for some reason don't report fraud. And this is a very big problem, across the entire continent. People don't want to report fraud for various reasons. How specifically do you tackle that?
Okay, you just think about a big corporation that is making a large payment. fraud is sometimes looked upon as a negative thing, and people generally believe if you fall for a fraudster's scam, you're a bit stupid. It's not always the case. So you go into your bank and actually admitting to them that you've been quote unquote foolish and fell for a scam that anyone would pick up. It brings a lot of shame. A lot of people we find are happy to take the losses and be quiet about it. Um, it is a shame because the fraudsters not only get away with it, but they also replicate that type of fraud because it pays them dividends. So we tell the customers, let us know when you've been a victim of fraud. It is absolutely important, not just for the losses, but for the prevention, for the betterment, for the next person, for the company, and getting the information out there because we do share information. It is a very important part of our work is that we actually do share information. We highlight the types of fraud we're seeing. We highlight the trends and we share the information between banks. We give information with regards to the applications we're even getting on onboarding stages. We share this information so that if we decline a credit facility or decline an account being opened here, the fraudster is going to go to the next place. But internally, we have shared the information and said, this is what they gave us. These are the details that they're providing. If you should receive an application from this person using this same details, no to decline. And by working cooperatively like that, we're finding that we're phasing out and pushing out the fraudsters. They are finding new ways, and we are also finding new ways to corner them and to prevent them from basically getting away with fraud.
Thank you very much. And absolutely, the fraudsters are always finding new ways and new patterns to exploit. I'm talking about patterns to you, Florian. One of FNA's strengths is mapping complex transaction networks. How can regulators and financial institutions leverage this mapping to detect unusual patterns or emerging threats in digital payments?
Yeah, thanks for that. So mapping is, I think, a crucial aspect of what we provide. Now, you can think about mapping as something that a human operator does, right? Maybe like a case fraud officer, or maybe it's done by automated means, so that it becomes a subject of machine learning. This is essentially what transaction monitoring in our framework does, right? But coming back, so maybe I can just add a little bit on what the human operator here does in this context, because it's actually quite interesting. So we mentioned how fraud is underreported. I fully agree with that, right? One of the reasons why I think it's underreported is because also in many jurisdictions, banks are not liable for authorized fraud, right? So this has certainly changed now in the UK, but in many other countries it hasn't, right? And then so therefore the basic position is that okay, so will I even gain anything, right, from reporting the fraud? So that's the other aspect. Will I be able to recover some of the money? Right, so this is often a problem. Now, the mapping of the transactions comes in the following way, right? So we already spoke about how money launderers are using moving the funds, right? Now, money laundering is also not legal, right? So and if you do it, then maybe there's actually going to be a case against you, and you will have to help make the victim whole again. Now, the mapping of the financial transactions is exactly that, right? So you can trace the flow of funds across the money muling network in order to determine then, okay, so who's been part of that money laundering operation? And you can then freeze these accounts, which has a couple of benefits, right? So first of all, it will earmark some money that can be used in as a recovery for the victim, right? So the victim can at least recover part of their proceeds. But then alternatively, also when you freeze an account like that, then that's information that can be used in order to prevent any future transactions to the same account, right? So, for example, any account that's used today in the third generation of money laundering in these neural networks might, in the next instance, be the first generation, right? And if that's no longer possible, then that's a benefit, right? Also, a big benefit here is and I think this is also quite interesting, right? So we spoke about the role of transaction monitoring, right? So let's prevent the fraud from happening in the first place. So I think that sounds fantastic, and I think it's a very important part of the toolkit. But one of the aspects that's often neglected is that, especially when it comes to authorized push payments, so the transaction monitor will alert you, hey, this transaction looks illegitimate, right? But then for psychological reasons, actually, the victims often still go ahead with the transaction, right? Which is quite puzzling. But then again, I mean, of course, you can understand that, right? So I think there's often a lot of psychological pressure, etc., that's being exerted. But anyways, fundamentally, the observation is that these transactions often still go ahead, right? Which is why we think that the mapping, like what I've explained, is quite important, because also it makes the operations of the fraud more expensive, right? So the harder it is for a fraudster to find a means to launder the money, the more expensive the business becomes and the less lucrative. And hopefully that can, because it's actually quite hard to get to the fraudsters themselves. I mean, there's many articles that you can read that the fraudsters, they're actually sitting in jurisdictions where you simply cannot get to them, sometimes even in like civil war zones, etc., right? But anybody in the middle, so they have to be typically, thanks to the KYC processes, for example, right? So Gina has alluded to those. So the account holders, they have to sit within the jurisdictions. They're typically known people, right? So therefore you can get to them, right? And so that's often quite a good angle to just actually start to make sure that you also combat the fraud operations like that. So that is, I think, my quick summary as to how the mapping can help, right? So just tracing the funds, freezing accounts, and making sure that these mule accounts are captured and used for the fraud prevention in the first place.
So in mapping, tracing, and freezing the account, how do you navigate around the legal and regulatory issues, especially for cross-border payments?
It's an excellent question. So again, cross-border is always the hardest, right? So I think it's often instructive to start with the national level frameworks first. And I think their privacy enhancing techniques are often super important, right? So you can share, for example, these networks, you can trace the funds on a completely anonymized basis, right? So nobody knows who the account holder is. And nobody even knows necessarily what the bank in question is, right? The bank that's holding the account. But you can still trace out the money, right? And you can use that in order to just still do a lot of the investigative work. Now, obviously, if I'm a case officer working at the bank, I can see the data, right? So I can use that data in order to investigate that problem. But still, the data only gets shared once there is actually a cause to share it, right? And what that cause to share it is actually not for me to determine, right? So I'm just a technology provider that tries, but really fundamentally, it's a legal question, right? And it's a legal question as to when it can be shared. But I think the good news here is that there's technology that can be used to an effect that's actually compliant with these legal frameworks, right? I think Henry also has pointed that out, right? So I think the only thing that's required from the supervisors is really to really explain and make these frameworks very concrete, right? So, and the more concrete it can get, the better it's going to be. So as long as there's legal uncertainty, quite often, there's a big inhibition on part of the FIs and other stakeholders to share any of the data, right? Because at the end of the day, they want to help, of course, right? But they also want to be shielded against any kind of legal liability that comes from sharing the data in the first place, right? So that I think is a big component.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Henry, I'm coming back to you, and this is purely from your field work and the experience you get from the field directly. Could you share an example from your work where you are seeing interventions that can help prevent fraud? What were the main takeaways, especially in terms of implementation in low resource settings?
All right, thank you, Cyril. So first is that at IPA, we do a lot of studies, especially around consumer protection, right? We have our consumer protection research initiative where we work with researchers to implement studies, and also to design solutions or interventions and test them through randomized impact evaluation to ensure that we feel we see the impact before it's implemented. So we work with diverse stakeholders, including government, researchers, and financial service providers. So I'm just going to share one, or maybe I'll also touch base a little bit on the second one, what we're doing with the regulator, but like to talk specifically around the intervention, some of the things we've done in the past. And I'm going to pick the one that is more relatable to what our conversation. So as I mentioned, we collaborate with the researchers. There's a study that we're currently implementing in Uganda, where we are trying to test to see if interactive mobile phone games could actually help to prevent fraud, right? So we work with researchers to implement an RCT, a randomized to set two different groups to test out this solution to see how that works, right? So what we did is to implement, the name of the studies, Choose Your Own Adventure. So we use interactive voice response game on fraud prevention, and where we guide the participant through the narrative scenarios, how to recognize fraud and how to respond to it. Although that this study is still at the early stage, but we're already seeing a lot of results, something that is really good. And I think that service providers and regulators could also, look at it. So what are we saying, right? So participants in this treatment group are more likely at the moment to recognize these frauds, right? They are more likely not to fall prey to it. And they're also more likely to escalate the fraud incident when it occurs. So these are some of the things at IPA. What we do is that we advocate for randomized impact evaluation of interventions before you implement them, right? So these are part of the things that we do. But also from the regulatory front, right? So as I mentioned when I started, we're working with the Central Bank of Nigeria, where we're building their capacity on how to implement innovative solutions or approaches for market monitoring, right? So one of the things we're doing is that leveraging these supervisory solutions to monitor the market, relying on supply side administrative data they're getting from FIs, to we analyze, put them through those rigorous high-level analysis to understand the trends in terms of complaints, where the complaints is coming from, those that are reporting, those that are not reporting, and all of that. So you see from the provider's front, we test these solutions that which we believe that once you have gone through this rigorous process, randomized impact evaluation process, you will know that this works and you can actually implement it. Then from regulatory side of work, we also work collaboratively with regulators to also build their capacity. We have said a lot about how regulators could leverage supervisory solutions to better understand the market, know the right policies to implement, and how to engage the provider. So we're also doing that, right? So maybe I will just stop here, and maybe I'm open to discuss further any of these initiatives.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight, Henry. And I think the job you're doing, which I think is a very great job, also can be extended further to basically help with the providers, right, or innovators in their product design, right, so that some of these feedbacks can be infused, and that would help really from the very beginning at the design stage, right? This can be incorporated, and that would eventually help in producing products that eventually would address the existing pain points. Looking into the future, Gina, I'm coming to you. As we round up, we'll be taking questions very soon. So I would once again ask that questions are dropped in the chat box, if there is any, so that we can do justice to that. Now, Gina, I'm coming to you now. Looking at the future, what technological advancements do you think will have the biggest impact on fraud prevention? And what can financial institutions do to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated fraud schemes?
Thank you for the question. For me, I think probably advancement and improvements of AI and machine learning is absolutely important because, as we've all discussed here today, fraud is becoming even more and more sophisticated. I mean, Florian is the tech guy, and they, I'm sure, are working really hard at bringing these new tools for us, the end users, to protect our clients against fraud. We use biometrics authentication. I'm a 3S Money. We are very, very much hand in hand working with tech to prevent fraud against our clients anyway, and ourselves as well. Again, we're using the real-time transaction monitoring, which is absolutely essential, and it's a big thing for using tech really to try and figure out what next. As you know, as new things come in, like let me cast your mind back to when chip and pin came in. When chip and pin came in, a lot of fraud happened because people were stealing pins and stealing cards. But before that, people were swiping cards. There was a whole lot of fraud, taking numbers and putting it on force embossing it on plastic cards and using it in places where mag stripe reading. So all of these new technologies are bringing new frauds. So as regulation changes, I feel we will be experiencing even more new innovative types of frauds, which I think AI would be the way forward for us, really, as an industry to fight against fraud, because there are many people who are just looking at new products that banks are bringing out, like crypto. Crypto is the next thing now. There's a lot of legislation or regulation that's being in process right now just to combat crypto, because criminals are now finding that it is probably one of the best ways to hide funds from money laundering side. So AI is the way forward for me. You also asked about what we can do to kind of make things better for us going forward. I think there has to be some kind of cross-border data sharing, better ones, for us to be able to hit fraud on the head, really. We need to also have some kind of a pragmatic approach towards fraud prevention, a uniform one, not just UK-centric, Euro-centric, and Africa-centric as well. A platform, so to speak, where we can all share ideas and maybe cut the red tape of GDPR and all of these limiting factors when it comes to fraud prevention. Because fraud really is a worldwide issue. It's not just it's not localized, and we're finding that a lot of these frauds, funds are leaving one region, moving to the next. So I think we need to have a uniform approach in the prevention of it. Effective legislation and cross-border cooperation. That's it, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Florence, quickly, all right? Florian, prevention is often the first line of defense. Can you share how data analytics, machine learning, and other AI-based tools are helping prevent fraud before it happens? Are there challenges to implementing these in markets with limited data infrastructure?
So I'm going to be very brief. So any availability of data that allows us to analyze using tools like machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc., the behavior of accounts, right? That is helpful. Feeding additional data into it is also helpful, like KYC data, and then but also feeding network data into the system, into these machine learning tools is also very helpful. And why? Because I can change my behavior if I'm a money launderer, but I can't change the behavior of necessarily those people that I'm interacting with, right? So kind of taking them all together combined, I think, is really the way to go in order to enhance the fraud prevention. Now, when data is not available, I think this is actually the key innovation that I'm looking for, right? So I think the machine learning models, they are there, and they can be operationalized. I think it's really that data sharing idea that I think is going to be the most powerful one going forward, and we need to share more data, right? Because really money launderers and fraudsters exploiting the fact that, essentially once you move your funds from one financial institution to the next, the chain breaks. You can no longer trace that, right? So because they're exploiting that, I think we need to counteract that. So that's kind of the biggest innovation that I'm looking forward to. And so yeah, then where that data is not available, I think we need to work to make it available, where there's a limited data infrastructure. So the data piping, these things can be taken care of, right? Setting up APIs via the web, etc. That can be taken care of. I think it needs like the legal clarity as to when can I share the data, right? How can I share the data? What are the parameters that I can work towards? That is, I think, what is needed, right?
Okay.
So again,
Still on you, Florian. I've got a question on the chat box for you.
Yeah.
In terms of network analytics, what markets can we look to for learnings?
Yeah.
Putting aside just a moment, just the second part to the question. Putting aside challenges of cross-border, is there a market where the ecosystem are making progress together that others could learn from?
Yes, so yes, there are a number of countries that are making a great amount of progress. One of the most outspoken ones, and one that I also had the tremendous pleasure of working with, is Malaysia, right? Where PayNet, the national payment system provider, has essentially put in place a system that leverages network analytics. There's a lot of information about that actually in the public domain, just in terms of the progress that's been made using track and trace, for example, that I've spoken about earlier. And so, yeah, then from then onward, there are a couple of other, there's actually, I mean, we alone, we're speaking to about 40 countries at the moment about, and there are various stages, having started with the implementation in some cases, in other cases much earlier, and they're across the globe. Right, so there's many other countries, but certainly, definitely, my recommendation would be to look up the Malaysian case, just because there's a lot of data out there in the public domain that's been shared by them already, and they've been really a trailblazer in this domain.
Great, thank you so much for that clarity. So one more wrap up, and then we're done. So, and this question is for all the panelists, right? So let's talk about the pursue aspect. Once fraud is detected, what's next? How can RegTech and SupTech support enforcement and recovery efforts? So, Henry, I'll start with you, and then Gina, and then we'll end with Florian.
All right, quickly because of time. So for me, I think the RegTech and SupTech solutions could help to automate the investigative workflow, the investigative process, support in data sharing. Florian has said a lot about data sharing, which is quite enlightening, and also Gina also mentioned what is obtainable, the mandate from the regulator in the UK, right? So I think these solutions could help to automate the process, because when fraud occurs, I think there are several players, so there are several stakeholders that are involved, right? So implementing a solution that could help to automate the process of data sharing and coordination between both the regulator, the provider, even the enforcement agencies as well, right? I think those are quite important, yeah, that would be all from my side.
Thank you very much, Henry. Gina, in 1 minute.
For me, I think that we probably need to start prosecuting fraudsters, especially people who have had confirmed fraud, and we have confirmed them as fraudsters. I think we need to really highlight it, data share, name and shame, and bring prosecutions to them.
Great. And Florian?
Yeah, so I will echo these excellent comments, but then on top of that, also, I think there's just a legal clarity around what data can be shared, right? Which is, I think, super important. And that's certainly very high up on my wish list. And I think supervisors and regulators will play a pivotal role on that.
Fantastic. So as we wrap up, I would like to thank each of our panelists for sharing their expertise and perspectives. It is clear from the discussion that RegTech and SupTech hold incredible potentials to prevent protect against and pursue digital payment fraud. But it will take collaboration, innovative thinking, and commitment to addressing these critical challenges in each of the markets. Just to summarize some of the key highlights. So we discussed about emerging fraud tactics and the role of advanced technologies in detecting and preventing fraud, the importance of collaboration between regulators and financial institutions to create safe financial ecosystems, the need to balance innovation with security to foster financial inclusion in vulnerable communities, protecting end users to build trust in digital payment systems, and the need for effective enforcement and cross-border cooperation in pursuing fraud. On behalf of the Alliance for Innovative Regulation, AIR, and indeed the entire team on this panel, I would like to say a special thank you to all partners for your invaluable support. To the attendees, I thank you for joining the session. I hope the discussion has sparked some new ideas and collaborations to drive impactful change. At this point, I would like to invite Victoria to provide more insights on the remaining activities for the tech sprint. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cyril. Thanks, everyone. I know we're over, but what an information-filled session. I found that fascinating. Thank you. So on the screen, there's a QR code, and I've also dropped it in the chat for anyone who wants to join the demo day tomorrow. We will have some interesting speakers. We'll have a fireside chat, and of course, the sprinters will demonstrate their solutions. So feel free to scan that QR code or go on the link on the chat. And then finally, I'm not going to call these out due to time, but we're really grateful to all delivery partners, all of the collaborators who have been on this journey with us for months, and of course, all of you speakers. So have a lovely day ahead, everybody. Have a great week, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.